Rare consoles that hardly anyone owns, a necessity for gracious living. Over the last year on this channel, we've journeyed through the wild world of forgotten tech, from delightfully obscure oddities cooked up by tiny no-name companies to monumental corporate failures that even gaming's mightiest titans would rather pretend never happened. And today we're diving into yet another one of those peculiar cases, a machine so overbuilt and overambitious, its creators genuinely believed it could conquer the world. In fact, at the time of its release, this curious contraption was technically the most powerful home console ever made. Whether or not that helped it sell that's another matter entirely. I am Lady Decade. Hit that subscribe button, as this is the story of the FM Towns Marty, a misunderstood and obscure console that aimed for the stars, but missed entirely and crash-landed straight into the bargain bin of retro gaming history. If you're watching a video on the FM Towns Marty, then chances are you've got quite exquisite taste in obscure gaming history. And you're probably a bit of a games hoarder too, like me. So why not build your digital collection for next to nothing? Use my discount codes in the pinned comment and save up to 90% on thousands of games and support my work simultaneously. Whether it's modern or retro, there are plenty of deals to plunder. And even better is the fact that there are no newly introduced expensive import tariff fees to pay on digital goods. Everyone wins, so enjoy it. Released in 1993 by none other than Fujitsu, yes, that Fujitsu, the Marty wasn't some side project by a plucky startup. Fujitsu was, and still is, a multinational tech giant, one of Japan's largest information and communication technology firms, with a well-established global footprint by the early 90s. And while their name might not be synonymous with gaming today, this wasn't their first rodeo either. Before the Marty, Fujitsu had already carved out a niche in Japan homes and schools with their FM Towns range of personal computers, machines that were surprisingly competent when it came to gaming. These machines were genuinely ahead of their time. We're talking high-resolution graphics, advanced sound, and most impressively, they were among the very first personal computers to include a built-in CD-ROM drive as standard. No messing about with external drives and no mountain of floppy disks. Just plug in and play. Naturally, this made them rather good at games, and sure enough, the FM Towns PC amassed a healthy, diverse game library, from Japanese RPGs to Western PC ports and even some uncensored arcade classics. So, with the CD-ROM revolution in full swing, Fujitsu made a bold move. They decided to spin off a dedicated games console version of the FM Towns, stripping away the complexity of a full PC and repackaging the whole thing as a sleek, simplified machine for the living room. It wasn't a radical concept either. Sega had already tried doing this in reverse with the Mega Drive and Terra Drive PC. Atari, bless them, kept trying it with just about everything. And Commodore would do the exact same thing that same year with the Amiga CD32. The FM Towns Marty hit shelves in 1993 and immediately made headlines for being the first home console in the world to market itself as a 32-bit system. Not only that, but it came equipped with both a CD-ROM drive and a side-mounted 3.5-inch floppy disk slot. Of course, as any seasoned retro enthusiast knows, the so-called bit wars of the 90s were complete and utter bollocks. Console manufacturers were flinging around numbers like confetti, all in a desperate bid to one-up each other, even when those claims were more marketing fantasy than technical reality. And yes, while the FM Towns Marty proudly declared itself a 32-bit console, the truth was a bit murkier. Technically, it was rocking a 32-bit AMD 386SX CPU, the kind typically found in early multimedia PCs. However, it only had a 16-bit data bus, which is the kind of caveat that makes hardware purists twitch uncontrollably. So, while Fujitsu weren't lying exactly, let's just say that Obi-Wan Kenobi would have approved. It was the truth, from a certain point of view. That said, the Marty was still a formidable piece of kit. A CD-ROM drive, high-quality audio, strong 2D capabilities. It was a genuine multimedia powerhouse for its time, and unlike a certain other console that also claimed to be 64-bit, Atari Jaguar, The Marty didn't need to scream about its specs from the rooftops while quietly hiding its inadequacies in the basement. Beyond its raw horsepower, the Marty had a few tricks up its sleeve that made it much more versatile than most consoles of the day. It was fully compatible with FM Towns PC peripherals, including the keyboard and mouse, meaning you could boot up certain software and games as if you were still sitting in front of a full-blown desktop machine. It even supported SRAM cards for saves, and Fujitsu released a proper joystick to round out the experience. The system could almost be used as a compact multimedia PC, a rare example of where a console genuinely pulled off that computer in disguise angle. Perhaps the most wonderfully Japanese feature of the FM Towns Marty, and I say this with absolute affection, was the inclusion of a microphone jack. Why? Because Fujitsu, in their infinite wisdom, decided that their powerhouse console should also double as a karaoke machine. And let's be honest, would it even be a proper Japanese console if it couldn't belt out a bit of bees or chaga and naska in the living room after a few Asahis? Japan says no. Now, it probably goes without saying, but one of the biggest reasons the Marty is so obscure today is that it never left Japan. This machine was exclusive to the land of the rising sun, which is a polite way of saying it was completely invisible to the rest of the world. As a result, it was never spoken about in the same breath as other 90s multimedia monstrosities. The Philips CDI, the Atari Jaguar, the Amiga CD32, or the real 3DO. Those hulking beasts that try to brute force their way into homes by flexing raw horsepower at unsuspecting parents. And yet, while the Marty stayed behind in Japan, some of its game library hinted at international ambitions. A number of titles supported English language options, and games like Ultima 6 even featured full English voice acting, a rare treat in that era. So clearly there was some intention, at least at one stage, to launch this thing globally, or at the very least in North America. Why it never happened, we'll never know. But if there was a timeline where the Marty made it west, I imagine it would have sat next to your CDI collecting dust while you smugly told your mates that it was technically more powerful than the SNES. Now, make no mistake, Fujitsu didn't just launch the Marty to make up the numbers. This wasn't a vanity project. They genuinely had world domination on the brain. But for all its ambition and technical merit, the FM Towns Marty sold about as well as a wet fart in a spacesuit. And a big reason for that, the price. If you fancied picking up a Marty back in 1993, you'd have needed to cough up around $700, and that's $1993. Adjusted for inflation, we're talking roughly $1,375 today, just for the console. No bundled games, no karaoke mic, not even a smug sense of superiority. To put that into perspective, in 1993, you could have bought a Super Nintendo and a Mega Drive and had enough money left over for a decent curry and a copy of Street Fighter 2, so yeah. It's no wonder that the Marty had trouble finding an audience. However, pricing wasn't its only hurdle. The Marty had a bit of an identity crisis, and that's largely because of the branding it inherited. You see, the FM Towns name in Japan wasn't exactly cool. It wasn't edgy or rebellious or even vaguely aspirational. No, it was mostly associated with school classrooms and educational institutions. The FM Towns PC was Japan's answer to the BBC Micro, a solid, functional workhorse, but not something your average teenager would daydream about unwrapping on Christmas morning. So when Fujitsu tried to repackage that same brand into a high-end luxury gaming console, many consumers just saw a glorified school computer in disguise. And very few people were willing to fork over high-end money for what they perceived as homework hardware. But does that mean the Marty's game library was packed with beige-coloured edutainment? Thankfully, no. Not even close. Amusingly, and perhaps a little ironically, despite its reputation as a glorified school computer, the FM Towns Marty would end up gaining notoriety for something rather less educational. You see, buried among its small but eclectic game library was a surprisingly healthy selection of hentai. Yeah, those kinds of games. Because the truth is, I guess, nothing says cutting-edge multimedia hardware like pixelated baps and awkward moaning. Clearly, this wasn't a console aimed at school children. After all, the Marty's hentai catalogue may not have been vast, but it was just prolific enough to carve out a curious niche, and probably helped move a few extra units among Japan's more refined otaku clientele. But lewd games aside, there were a few practical drawbacks that also made the system a tougher sell. One such problem was how the hardware itself was designed, or rather, how inflexible it was. Fujitsu built the Marty to be difficult to modify or tinker with. Unlike most personal computers of the time, which practically invited users to pull them apart and upgrade them, the Marty was a locked-down, closed system. A nightmare for hobbyists. And a blessing, I imagine, for any well-off parents who didn't fancy their precious bundle of joy dismantling a £1,100 machine just to see if it could run Doom. To be honest, it is a shame really, because the Marty did have some genuinely forward-thinking features. It could boot directly from CD-ROM, something that many other systems wouldn't adopt for years, and combined the muscle of a home computer with the streamlined interface of a traditional games console. In a way, it was almost like an early ancestor of the PlayStation 5 or the Xbox Series X, a console with the soul of a PC way ahead of its time, but tragically out of its depth. So, yes, there were quite a few reasons why the FM Towns Marty never quite became a household name. Chief among them, most people simply weren't rich enough, or Japanese enough. It was niche hardware aimed at a niche audience in a niche market, not exactly a recipe for mass appeal. Still, after the predictably slow start, Fujitsu did eventually cave and drop the price of the Marty in hopes of shifting a few more units, and to be fair, sales did pick up slightly, but by then the damage had already been done. Fujitsu, a company not exactly known for its patience in consumer electronics, had already made up its mind. The Marty was a write-off. Instead of doubling down, they cut their losses and quietly backed away from the console market. Consumers, meanwhile, were far more interested in the NEC PC 9800 series, a far less powerful machine, but one that had already cemented itself as the dominant PC platform in Japan. The PC 98 was a bit like the beige box equivalent of an industry standard. Outdated? Certainly. But familiar, accessible and far more entrenched in offices and homes than Fujitsu's more exotic offering. It just goes to show, 32 bits of cutting-edge silicon won't save you if your audience still prefers 16 bits of comfortable mediocrity. Still, Fujitsu weren't quite ready to throw in the towel completely. They gave it one more go with the FM Towns Marty 2 in 1994, a slightly updated model with rumours of a faster CPU swirling around it. Spoiler alert, it didn't have one. The Marty 2 was essentially the same console in a new plastic shell. The FM Towns Marty 2 was marketed at a more affordable price point, aimed at making the console just a tiny bit more palatable for those who didn't have the disposable income of a minor royal. But even with this modest relaunch, the Marty story wasn't quite finished yet, because, dear viewer, it was time for the car Marty. Yes, that's right. The next logical step for Fujitsu obviously was to take their underperforming multimedia console and shove it in a car. And thus was born the car Marty, possibly the most ludicrously niche, gloriously over-engineered gadget ever aimed at yuppies with too much money and far too much time spent in traffic. This luxury unit was specifically built for in-vehicle use, complete with a built-in satellite navigation system, audio CD playback, and the ability to run FM Towns software on the move. Because if there's one thing every responsible driver needs, it's a copy of Splatterhouse in the glove box. And when you weren't driving, you could unplug the whole unit, take it into your house, and continue playing your games there. The car Marty really was the console equivalent of having a cigar humidor in your boot. A full multimedia suite that screamed, "Look at me, I'm a Tokyo salaryman with very specific priorities." It was, I dare say, a necessity for gracious living if your idea of gracious living was overpriced hardware and traffic jams and occasional karaoke. But of course, even luxury gimmicks have their limits, and as we rolled deeper into 1994, the writing was well and truly on the wall. The 5th generation console war was about to begin in earnest. That's right, the Sega Saturn and Sony PlayStation were just around the corner, packing next-gen tech, international marketing and game libraries stacked to the ceiling. Fujitsu, wisely, knew better than to stick around and get steamrolled. Rather than trying to outfight these gaming titans, they chose to quietly bow out. The FM Towns Marty line, in all its weird and wonderful forms, was officially finished. Of course, rarity and obscurity are often romanticised in retro gaming circles, but when it comes to the FM Towns Marty, it's not just about supply and demand. There were also some very real hardware setbacks that have contributed to its elusive status today. For starters, the Marty has a bit of a reputation for being a fragile little diva. One common failure point is the internal drive belt, a thin rubber component that, over time, has a nasty habit of melting, which is not exactly the kind of thing you want happening inside of your £1,000 collector's item. And like many consoles from that early 90s era, the Marty is also prone to failing capacitors, making functional clean units increasingly rare as the years roll on. Then there's the controller. For all the Marty's technical muscle and multimedia credentials, it's launched with an oddly simplistic 2-button pad. It was functional, sure, but hardly cutting edge. This was a machine capable of CD audio, FMV playback, and 32-bit processing. And it was being piloted by a controller that looked like it belonged to a toy keyboard. Still, I suppose you don't need that many buttons when most of your gaming sessions involve slowly clicking through awkwardly censored anime smut. But I digress. Between the high launch price, modest marketing, short lifespan, and now its increasingly fragile hardware, the FM Towns Marty has become one of the rarest and most expensive retro consoles out there. You're unlikely to find one on the cheap, and if you do, well, chances are it'll need a little bit of TLC before it boots. But let's say you do manage to get your grubby little mitts on a working Marty. What exactly are you going to do with it? Well, apart from the obvious. Beyond the smart during its short and awkward life, surprisingly the FM Towns Marty built up its own respectable little library of games. Now, granted, that library wasn't enough to convince the masses to choose it over the Super Nintendo, a Mega Drive, or even a decent home computer, but let's not confuse commercial failure with poor quality. Because, ironically, while the Atari Jaguar was desperately slapping 64-bit stickers onto the box to distract from its dire selection of shovelware, the Marty was doing the complete opposite, boasting an actually decent catalogue of games that few people ever saw. The truth is that while it didn't get much credit at the time, the Marty software lineup is surprisingly decent. It's head and shoulders above most other forgotten curios from that era, certainly more impressive than the Philips CDI, Amiga CD32, or anything the 3DO was pretending to be. While few Marty titles truly pushed the hardware to its limits, what we did get was often polished, well-made, and, dare I say, fun games. And if you were lucky enough to get your hands on any Marty titles, there was an added bonus. The packaging. Marty games often came in very snazzy plastic boxes, chunky, glossy things that made the games feel like luxury goods. It was like opening a Neo Geo AES case, minus the minor heart attack at the price tag. Now, Muscle Bomber, or as it's known in the West, Saturday Night Slam Masters, was released in arcades and ported to both the Mega Drive and Super Nintendo, but very few people realise that the FM Towns Marty version is, without a doubt, the best of the bunch. This port is smoother, cleaner, and more arcade accurate than its console cousins, thanks in large part to the Marty's beefier hardware and that glorious CD quality audio. It's a wrestling game where everything just feels that bit crispier, from the animations to the soundtrack to the thwack of a pile driver connecting just right. Also, Mike Hagar, the former mayor who suplexes criminals in his spare time, rocking the kind of moustache that screams either professional grappler or banned from most playgrounds. But there's no denying it, he's dangerous. The FM Towns Marty also played host to its own version of Turbo Outrun, originally a 1989 arcade racer that was later ported to the Sega Mega Drive and various home computers. But the Marty version, it's easily one of the most polished home versions of the game out there. Fluid graphics, sharp colours, and best of all, glorious CD quality music that blows the tinny chiptunes of the 16-bit era completely out of the water. When it comes to capturing that iconic Yu Suzuki arcade road trip energy, the Marty delivers it in spades. If you've never played it, Turbo Outrun puts you behind the wheel of a bright red Ferrari F40, blasting your way from New York to Los Angeles while outrunning cops, traffic, and a smug computer-controlled rival, all against a ticking clock and changing weather conditions. It's pure arcade fantasy with synths and superchargers. Incidentally, I actually did that drive myself in real life twice. And let me tell you, no one has made it across America in under an hour unless they were ignoring the laws of time, space, and common sense. So yes, the developers got the geography a bit wrong, but to be fair, this was pre-Google Maps, and it's hard to check your route when you're too busy listening to a saxophone solo at 180 miles an hour. Next up, we have Raiden, a Japanese vertical scrolling shooter and another solid arcade port that showcases the Marty's capabilities. Much like Turbo Outrun, this version easily outperforms many of its counterparts on other systems, offering slick performance and beautiful sound. And in true shmup fashion, it's absolutely outrageously difficult. But that's part of the fun, isn't it? If your thumbs aren't sweating and your soul isn't dying a little every time you explode into a fiery pixel cloud, are you even playing a proper 90s shooter? Whether you're a hardcore arcade veteran or just masochistically curious, Raiden is a great addition to the Marty's catalogue. Next up, we've got Flying Shark, a classic vertical shmup from Toplan, released in 1987. You pilot a biplane through a gauntlet of enemies, dodging bullets and delivering glorious pixelated justice from above. You may know it better under its Western title Sky Shark, and let me tell you, this game does not mess about. It's one of those coin-hungry arcade experiences that makes Raiden feel like a warm-up. Punishing? Absolutely, but also incredibly satisfying once you get into the zone. Now, let's talk about something a bit bloodier. The best home version of Splatterhouse, and yes, I said it, can be found on the FM Towns Marty. Forget the PC Engine version, this is the definitive way to play Namco's iconic 1988 slasher beat-em-up outside of the arcade. You take control of Rick, a parapsychology student resurrected by the Terror Mask and plunged into a hellish nightmare inside West Mansion. Your goal, punch, kick and bludgeon your way through hordes of grotesque monsters in a desperate attempt to rescue your girlfriend Jennifer, assuming she hasn't already been disemboweled or mutated beyond recognition. It's gory, grotesque and an absolute all-time classic, and here on the Marty, it runs like a dream, with arcade-accurate visuals, uncensored violence and a haunting CD audio soundtrack that elevates the whole horror vibe beautifully. Moving on, we have Truxton 2, a little-known vertical shooter that debuted in arcades in 1992. As far as I can tell, this FM Towns version is the only home port of the game ever released, which means that if you want to own a physical copy of Truxton 2, this is literally your only option. No re-releases, no digital ports, just this one obscure disc floating around the Japanese second-hand market like a forgotten ghost of bullet hell's past. And honestly, it makes it kind of cool. Truxton 2 features satisfyingly chaotic gameplay in that classic vertical shooter style, complete with the ability to launch lightning bolts from your ship and reduce your enemies to space dust. It's frantic, it's flashy, and it's the sort of thing that makes me wonder, does Mark from Classic Game Room have a physical copy of this tucked away somewhere? Because if any game screams late night YouTube deep cuts, it's this one. Now let's take a sharp left turn into something visually weird. Viewpoint is a space shooter that, as the name implies, plays out from a rather unusual angle. Rather than the typical top-down or side-scrolling view, Viewpoint uses an isometric perspective, giving the game a pseudo 3D appearance that makes it stand out, at least visually. You move through alien-infested environments, shooting anything that moves, all while trying to adjust to the fact that your ship is now travelling diagonally across the screen. It certainly looks less generic than your average space shooter, and the music's brilliant too, but honestly, I find it a bit of a chore to play. It's like going from Sonic the Hedgehog to Sonic 3D Blast. Sure, it's technically impressive and different, but it just doesn't quite hit the same. And now we come to my favourite game on the Marty, Hooli Ruler. I properly love this game so much. I actually made an entire deep dive video about it a couple of years back. It is utterly bonkers. Developed by Taito, Hooli Ruler is a beat-em-up so bizarre that it makes Earthbound look like a GCSE science textbook. The FM Towns version is arcade perfect, but the game also saw ports to the Sega Saturn, PlayStation and even PlayStation 2, though naturally only in Japan. The game itself is a side-scrolling beat-em-up where you can play as either a girl or a suspiciously familiar-looking pre-scandal younger version of Vince Kennedy McMahon, wielding a magical staff and smacking enemies across the head as you make your way through an increasingly psychedelic fever dream of a world. It's weird, it's wonderful, and I love it. I love it with my whole heart. I cannot overstate just how bizarre Hooli Ruler is. It's one of those games that you don't so much play it, but you experience it, like someone slipped acid into a Saturday morning cartoon and dared you to make sense of it. All I can say is it absolutely reeks of Japan, and case in point, there's an entire stage where you can walk through a massive pair of women's legs protruding from a wall with a door between them in, you know, her hoo-ha, hoo-ha, hoo. And what occasionally bursts out of this door? Pink elephants. Because, yeah. Now, unsurprisingly, this bit didn't survive the trip to America, even in arcades. The only place where the game was playable at all. The US arcades version had that entire section cut out, presumably to avoid giving heart attacks to the same puritanical crowd who thought that The Simpsons was the devil's propaganda. Won't somebody please think of the children? Honestly, Hooli Ruler is the perfect title to own on a console like the FM Towns Marty, a delightfully weird, underappreciated game on a delightfully weird, underappreciated system. Because when you take a step back and look at the Marty's full library, between the arcade-perfect ports, the experimental stuff, and the just plain unhinged, what you've got is arguably a stronger catalogue than most of the strange CD-based platforms that limped out in the early to mid-90s. The Marty is one of the most expensive retro consoles on the secondary market today, and it's not just because of its rarity, but because it now lives in that strange grey area between cult curiosity and hipster status symbol. Owning one is like owning a Laserdisc player or a Betamax collection. You know you don't need it, but having it makes you feel like you're part of a very smug, very pixel-perfect secret club. There is a special kind of buzz that comes from sitting down with a real FM Towns Marty and playing through arcade-accurate ports on original hardware. It's not about convenience, it's about that weird collector's high, knowing you're experiencing something the vast majority of gamers never have and never will. It's hipster gold. But even the shiniest gold doesn't change the fact that there are far easier, simpler and infinitely cheaper ways to play the exact same games. So unless you're swimming in disposable income or have a deep personal commitment to Japanese multimedia oddities from the early 90s, maybe just give this one a pass. But if, like me, you believe in celebrating the strange, the forgotten, and the over-engineered, then yes, the FM Towns Marty might just be a necessity for gracious living. One final note, though, before you rush off to empty your savings account, the FM Towns Marty has no copy protection. So, if you do decide to fork out an obscene amount of money for this sleek, high-end slice of retro history, well, let's just say there are more dubious ways to enjoy its extensive and occasionally saucy library. Dubious delights indeed. Don't forget, you can build your digital collection for next to nothing. Use my discount codes in the pinned comment to save up to 90% on thousands of games and support my work simultaneously. Whether it's modern or retro, there are plenty of deals to plunder. And even better is the fact that there are no newly introduced expensive import tariff fees to pay on digital goods. Every purchase goes towards funding this channel, or if you want to support my work in a more personal way, access my cosplay library over on Patreon and YouTube memberships. Happy shopping, and I'll see you all in the next video.